That looks great. All right, welcome to Practical Steps Toward an Accessibility Mindset. My name is Marcus Harrison. I've been in the industry for about 14 years. Started primarily as a graphic designer. And then over time, by the last 7 years, got into development, and we as a company got into Drupal development. Work for Texas Creative. We were established in 1985. We are a full-service marketing and advertising firm located in San Antonio, Texas. Our in-house Drupal team has built sites for the San Antonio River Authority, Jefferson Bank, the Tobin Center for Performing Arts, just to name a few. This session is going to talk about accessibility, web accessibility tools, some tips, and keyboard accessibility. Accessibility. The main goal for web accessibility. It's important that everyone, regardless of disability, has unabated access to information on the web. People with disabilities should be able to comprehend, navigate, and interact with the web just like anyone else. Just focusing on visual impairment alone, there's 4% of Americans, there's 4% legally blind, 9% with some form of color blindness, and 13% with difficulty seeing. This equates to millions of people just in America alone. And that's just focusing on visual impairments. You know, a lot of us may find ourselves in one of these groups later in life, perhaps. Here's a recent news article just from the beginning of October. Supreme Court allows blind people to sue retailers if their websites are not accessible. That's from the Los Angeles Times. It's a popular case, Domino's Pizza. I think we're just going to see more and more of these types of cases. I think the lawyers are kind of smelling blood in the water with this stuff. And ultimately, it's a good thing because it's bringing accessibility more into the light. How can we minimize our legal risk? The main thing is just be proactive. Handle web accessibility issues now. More importantly, implement a web accessibility policy. Put it on your website. Have that somewhere where it's accessible to somebody looking at your company's website. This way it kind of shows that it becomes clear that you're thinking about this and you're taking steps towards being accessible. Don't be like Domino's and act like you don't care, right? The guidelines we're trying to strive for are set up by WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. It's been a thing for a while, it's nothing new. Version 2.0 dates back to December 2008. The most current version, 2.1, was adopted just back in June 2018. There's multiple levels. Level A is the most basic web accessibility features. Level AA addresses the most common issues for disabled users. And level AAA is reserved for sites that serve the disabled community directly. So, which one of these should we be focusing on? Making our sites? It would be level AA. That's what we kind of want to strive for. Let's talk about some accessibility tools. There's a web accessibility evaluation tools list. It can be found at w3.org. Quite long. There's over 132 tools here. Has anybody here used any of these tools? Which one do you use? I mean, not necessarily out of those that are pictured there, but just in general. Do you have one that you like to use?
I've used, there's a plugin that I've used for Chrome for vision, and it simulates different types of vision, like
really?
Filters and stuff like that.
Okay.
I've used that one quite a bit.
Cool.
And then there was another one, I totally forgot the name of it, I'm sorry, but that we've run some studies through and checked out.
Okay. Well, this is kind of somewhat new for Texas Creative as well. We just started kind of focusing in on this a little bit more than we have been in previous years. And the one that I have experience with is called the Wave tool. It's a web accessibility evaluation tool. It shows your web content overlaid with little indicators and icons where there might be problem areas. And we can take a look at that in a second. It's a free service provided by WebAIM, and it's available at wave.webaim.org. There's also browser plugins available for this, for both Chrome and Firefox. I'll take a look at what that tool looks like. So this is the main homepage for Wave. You can just type in any website that you're working on here. Takes it a second to load. This is actually our homepage. So right off the bat, you'll notice the summary on the left-hand side of the screen. It's showing you quite a bit of information here. The two main things we're concerned with is this red errors section and also this 35 yellow alerts section. It's kind of more like a warning, these yellow ones. Those are the primary areas of focus when we're looking at a site for accessibility. It also kind of explains what all these icons are with a little information tab next to each one, so you can kind of see what it's talking about. So it's pretty handy. It takes a little bit to get used to. There's some tabs here across the top. This main tab that it starts you out with kind of shows your website at the best of its ability with these little icons here. It kind of breaks things a little bit, to be honest, but it kind of shows you where the problem areas may be. There's a tab here called No Styles, which shows your website basically just how it's rendered without any CSS, like basically the DOM, basically raw. Which is handy because this is kind of how the order of things that that would be read by a screen reader or something like that. And then we have the contrast section, which is a big part of it. And this shows you where all your low contrast issues are, which, as you can see here, the majority of our issues with this website are dealing with contrast, and they're visual issues. And if I hover over these, it's saying very low contrast. There's a very low contrast between foreground and background colors. So, and that's pretty much the case for all 47 of these errors. Oops. So, let's see here. Just in my experience with this, some things that I've run into is it tends to have an issue with background images because the Wave testing tool doesn't really see the image itself that's on top of the background. So what it sees is white text on essentially a white background most of the time, right? So it says, hey, there's an issue here. There's no contrast between white and white, so you got a problem. However, since it doesn't see the background image, one way to fix it and just avoid the error is to put a solid color behind your background image, maybe like black or some darker color that you pick out of the image, perhaps. And that will give you a passing, score for that. However, there still could be some contrast issues with white text on a background image, depending on what the image is. Like if it's a blue sky or something, that white text, even though it's passing in the Wave tool, may still be hard to read for some people. Another issue we ran into is you might run into some false positives, like where you'll get something that's failing, but it's really not failing because the Wave tool doesn't see certain things like box shadows, and like this blur in here button we have like a large kind of box shadow on there that's actually effectively changing the color of that yellow, and it does pass. But since Wave tool doesn't see the shadow styling, it just sees that base yellow color compared to the white and says, hey, this is low contrast, you got to fix it. So in some cases we're actually having to tool drop certain colors, and I'll show you that here in a second. So here we have these contrast tools here, and you can actually change these colors. So we'll just plug in, we'll like take an eyedropper tool and test what that color is visually and just paste it in here until we get a passing score for the AA level. So that's typically what we'll do. And sometimes we'll just use this color graph here to find a new color that passes. So we'll just pick colors until we see passing grades, basically. Close to the relative color that's pre-existing in whatever area. In some cases, you can change the font size, change the font weight, change font colors, but you find that you're kind of destroying the design a little too much. And there comes a point where you might want to come have a workaround solution instead of kind of altering your design too heavily to where it looks too far departed from its original look. So actually, what we did with the site recently, this is a site we did for San Antonio River Authority, and they have this really nice blue color that's being used in the header and also the footer. We have this giant menu that opens up when you click the hamburger icon. And there's just so much content here, there's so many children pages here that we couldn't boost the font size large enough, or else we just destroyed this menu. We'd have the font would have to be huge for it to get a passing score for a AA level. So what we ended up doing for a workaround solution was we built this little high contrast toggle here, which if you click it, it changes the background color to a passing color. And that's a cookie that's set, and it affects the site-wide. So once they click on that, the site just adopts the darker blue color across the board. And it's there, and it's also down in the footer. So when you can't make it work any other way, that's an option. I do feel there's a design impact to this because it somewhat limits color palettes or certain color combinations, like we saw with the lighter blue and the lighter white text. It also limits font sizes that you can use in certain places on certain background colors. So I kind of feel like it does have a design impact, when you're dealing with accessibility. And I also feel the accessibility mindset should really start in design and kind of work its way to development. I mean, a lot of the problem with these the testing tools is they're all meant for sites that are already built and developed. It's not something that you apply to design. However, there is a plugin for Sketch called Stark that does look at contrast, and it's a free plugin that you can use with Sketch to kind of get a head start on some of those possible accessibility issues that you might encounter down the road. And I guess Homer's a designer in this case. Keyboard accessibility. This is a big one. Since a lot of users can't see, they're relying on the keyboard to navigate through the sites. A lot of times they're just going to navigate through the site just using the tab key alone, or maybe the combination of the tab key and the enter key to select on stuff. So semantic HTML is a good starting place towards accessibility best practices. You want to structure your pages using these native HTML elements like header, nav, main, article, button, aside, footer, instead of having a bunch of divs and spans everywhere, right? You also want to structure your pages, ideally you're going to have one H1 per page that matches the page title, and you're not going to skip around a bunch of headings. Like you're not going to start with the H1 and the very next heading on a page is the H5 for some reason. So you want to make sure everything is kind of laid out in that order and that structure. ARIA labels, actually pronounced ARIA labels, are accessible rich internet applications. That's what it stands for. It's a set of attributes that define ways to make web content and web applications more accessible to people with disabilities by providing an extra information to screen readers via HTML attributes. Basically, we have limited experience with these, but using the Wave tool kind of like highlighted certain areas where we needed these labels, because otherwise it was basically invisible to screen readers. One of those instances that we found was with a hamburger icon. The Wave tool was just like, I don't know what this is. What is this? So we basically had to add an area label to that, kind of highlighting it that it's a menu. And a couple other instances where we had that problem was with form fields that didn't have labels. I think we had like a form field that had no label, but just had like a search magnifying glass was like the submit. So it really was unclear what that was to a screen reader. And this gets way more in depth. There's a good resource here that I put a link to on w3c.github.io that details a lot of these area labels. But once you've tested everything in the Wave tool and you got your site in a much better place and you think it's good, you're not necessarily done at that point. The best thing to do is to test the site for yourself. Like, see what this experience is like navigating a site on a keyboard alone. So Chromevox is a plugin for Chrome that is a screen reader plugin that I've been testing with. It's pretty decent. The tab through path is very important. Like I spoke about earlier, when you're hitting tab, you're kind of just tabbing through a site. And you want to make sure that the order in which things are tabbed to kind of makes sense, right? There's a lot of native elements that are focusable when you're tabbing through, and those are like buttons, form fields, and hrefs, you know. So that's what those are native elements that it's always going to tab to. Let me go to this. Like if I start tabbing through this page, for example. Oops. See, it's kind of somewhat broken here. Let me pick up a different here. This is just a simple HTML page. If I start tabbing through this page, it's going to go to certain items, right? I'm going to go to certain places. Now, it's advisable that you don't really alter that, but there is a way that you can alter the tab path through a website using the tab index attribute. So it's generally not advisable to mess with it unless it needs some attention or unless you want to not have something be able to be tabbed to or focused on via tab. And I'll show you what that looks like in the code, actually. This is the basic HTML to this little thing that we have here. Just super basic HTML. So you'll see here, we have this tab index attribute on just kind of random items just to illustrate this point. The way it works is tab index, those items that are normally tabbed to, like form fields and buttons, etc., they don't need anything tab index-wise. They're effectively a tab index of 0. But you can change the order if you put a tab index, basically tab index 1 to 1,000,000 will set a certain path. So like right here I have tab index 1, that'll be the first thing that if the user tabs to on the site, it's going to go to tab index 1. This is going to go up in value until there's nothing to go up to, and then it's just going to fall back in line to what it would normally tab to, and I'll kind of demonstrate this so it makes more sense. So here, if I start tabbing, it goes to email, and I put what they actually are here, tab index value, so you can kind of see. Email is 1, so that's the first thing it goes to on the page. The next thing it's going to go to on the page is what we have tab index 2 set as. There's certain things that aren't focusable natively, like page titles, for example. I gave this page title tab index of 0, so it's going to fall in line with the normal focusable elements like buttons and form fields. So if I hit tab again, it's going to go to all the zeros in all the native elements like form fields, etc. So as I tab down the page, it's just going to go tab down the page normally. Does that make sense? Did I go over that too fast? Another thing here is under state, I have a tab index of -1. If you want to remove something from the tab index and not have it be focusable at all via tab index -1 will make it to where no matter how many times I tab through the site, I'm never going to highlight that. It's never going to become focusable. Of course, if I was on a screen reader, I could still click on it, but just via the tab sequence, it's never going to get hit. So unless there's a specific use case for that, you know, I can't think of one, but you may find one that you need that for. So.
Maybe a duplicate items you might want to.
Yeah, I was thinking because sometimes you'll have like even on the Sarah site we had some views where we're kind of outputting. Let me see if I can get to that. Scrolling on a mouse pad is a challenge for me.
I need to reload the. I need to reload the page.
Reload it. Okay, like. When you have duplicate links to the same content, they tend to frown on that as an accessibility issue. Like here we have this title that's a link, and this learn more is a link to the same exact thing, right? So the Wave tool flags that and says you got two links to you got like redundant links here basically, right? So one, you could technically put tab index -1 on this one just so you're only going to tab to the learn more call to action and not have these redundant paths. Because when you're listening to a screen reader, listen to it say multiple things that are the same. It's just going to get, it's going to deduct from the overall user experience. So that would be one possible use case for a tab index of -1. Does anybody have any experience with this at all, or used it for any reason? Okay. So the main point there is, and you even want to test it with a screen reader. I debated on whether I wanted to go through that now because it is interesting, but I mean, I can turn that on here as well. I think we have plenty of time. Oops.
Seems like you still need to reload that page.
If you just hit the very, very top, it'll give you the, like,
Thanks, sir. All right.
Chromevox spoken feedback is ready.
So I guess it's not coming out of the TV.
go back up to that super top menu, and then the speaker icon.
Speaker
Connect it
notes
to the TV.
application.
In the right.
Right here?
Mm-hmm.
Do HD PVR.
That one?
Yeah.
Tab index attribute.
There we go. Okay. So this is what this is going to sound like
Edit
here.
text. Email entry. Name 2. Edit text. Page title 0. Heading 1.
And the only reason it's focusing on the page title is because I gave it a tab index of 0, so it puts it in line with the normal DOM elements.
Main menu. Navigation list with 3 items. About us. Link list item. Our company. Link list item. Who we are. Link list item.
Now, if I wanted this paragraph to be focusable via tab, I would just want to give it a tab index of 0.
Thinking.
Did I mess something up there?
Yeah. Drag to something there. Yeah.
It's a challenge, like looking at the screen and doing this here.
Window tab index attribute tab. Page tab index attribute. Main menu. Navigate our who we are. Link list item. Exited.
So now this paragraph becomes
Navigation list
focusable.
with 3 items. Lorem ipsum dolores in the net. Consector in invalid. Dice women in his ex. Sticulum duo non inside up. At lowering torque premium. Frosty vitam
Alright, so get the idea there. I had to hear that a lot in the last couple of days. I had 3 paragraphs of Greek there previously.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you have 3 paragraphs there, do you have to mark each paragraph with a tab index, or can you do the wrapping div with that?
You could do the wrapping div with that, yeah. And that's only for the tab. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say is that it's not necessary to have that as a tab index for a screen reader to read it though, right? Want it?
For it to be focusable via just the tab sequence, yes, but no,
Sure.
with a screen reader, it would technically pick that up. With screen readers, you can click on really anything and it will read it.
Yeah.
So, but if you're just, people are just using it via the tab button and the enter buttons, then yeah, you'd have to give it a tab index if you wanted it to be part of that experience. So, I mean, typically, it's going to be buttons and form fields are the main thing. So you don't want to cloud that up with too much extra stuff. But if it makes sense for what you're doing and the experience, then I think it'd be all right. Any questions on any of that at this point?
Window. Navigation accessibility concept.
Let me go ahead and turn that
Window
on.
tab index attribute tab. Extensions tab.
There we go. All right, is it anyone here doing anything actively with their sites to make them more accessible? Like, are we testing our sites or anything? What problems are we running into that you guys are finding? Anything specific? Because I feel like we're maybe slightly late to the game on this. I'm just kind of curious, like, are we behind, or are we kind of ahead, or like I kind of want to gauge like where everyone else is with this whole accessibility thing, because it feels like it's kind of the tip of the iceberg for me. Anybody?
Around the same.
Yeah.
We found out, because we're a school district. So,
Okay.
a year and a half ago, we got a lawsuit. So
Oh, really?
that's when we started learning about it,
Yeah.
using the WAVE tool and
Okay.
everything else.
Anything that you've discovered with the Wave tool that maybe I didn't talk about?
No, the transparent, the images is that's the one that's difficult for me.
Yeah.
It's giving the false ones. So I was putting like a black background behind it.
Mhm.
I didn't know if that was right or not. If it's the right.
It's right as far as you just want to get the passing score on the screen, but depending on the content of the actual image, it still might not be accessible. You know, if it's a brightly colored image and you got white text parked on it, even though you're getting a passing score in there, it still probably needs like a drop shadow or maybe even like a black field behind the text to kind of bring it out on top of that image and make it more readable. So it's kind of a balance. But that's why it's kind of like practical steps towards accessibility, because it's not like really one thing that you can do and be done with it. It's just something you're constantly striving towards and, you know, making steps towards.
On the design side of things, you mentioned the Sketch plugin and that's dealing mostly with contrast. Are there other things that you feel like should be shifted to that part of the process, or is pretty much everything else in the development arena?
Actually, we can look at what that Stark offers, because that might be a good thing to check out.
I think under pricing, Marcus, it has like what you get for free and then what the
Yeah.
version includes.
Yeah, and I think the main thing in both of those tiers is the contrast. So there's a $20 a year pro plan. Contrast checker is the first thing in the free, and it's also one of the main things in the pro plan. We also have colorblind simulation, which you were speaking about in one of those other apps that you did. That might be good. It's also in the free version though. I don't know what rapid contrast checking would be, just I guess faster. Access to Stark Beta Slack. So I don't know, I think the free version, in really just focusing on contrast, because we saw when we tested Texas Creative, by and large, the biggest problems with that site were all contrast related. So I think just having a contrast checker plugin for Sketch would be enough as a starting point towards accessibility, and then have some of the other stuff, you know, happen in depth.
I like how you guys solved the San Antonio River Authority problem with like a different toggle. I
Yeah,
never thought about that because contrast ratios, those have been the biggest issue for us.
yeah,
Is fixing all these problems and having to drop like an ugly text shadow or something and just completely kill out the design.
yeah. You don't want to kill the design
Yeah.
too much.
So, but that's cool. I didn't know they had an XD add-on for this too.
Yeah.
So we had to.
Oh, Adobe XD. Yeah.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah, $20 a year, pretty cheap.
Did you put any analytics on that toggle to see how often it was getting used?
Do we?
I mean, we have the analytics, but I haven't looked at it to
I
see.
didn't know if you
That'd be
put
interesting.
like a event on that one or something like that, so you
Yeah.
can actually watch to see how often people are using it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's a good idea.
And will that actually meet AA compliance without any issues for people, as long as they can get to that toggle?
Yeah, as long as there's an alternative, like you can fix the problem or you can provide an alternative.
Oh, okay,
and
so
that
either one of
counts.
those.
As long as the alternative is easily findable and
That's what-
something that can be turned on, and especially if it stays on, it's not
Mhm.
something that has to be done every time the page loads.
Gotcha.
So, in fact, what was that plugin that we found?
User way.
Yeah, the user way.
This would be like if you didn't want to do any custom work at all. It just out of the box, this little widget that goes on your site and provides, kind of rude contrast changing. Like it can destroy your design pretty quickly, but it would technically pass you if you had something like this. Because you have ways for people to change the contrast and boost the text size and whatever else they have here. And it's just all in one compact widget. So that's an option if you didn't want to put in the work and go the hard route. But that things like this do exist.
It's kind of the sledgehammer approach, I think.
Just
But
completely change your style sheet.
well,
Yeah.
it just puts a little icon in the corner of the site, and if someone needs some accessibility modification, they can find it in there.
Yeah.
But you're not really doing the work of making it accessible. You're just providing it.
Yeah, and I think if you're dealing with custom design work, like typically all of our design work is really highly designed and nice and neat and customized. We don't really want to destroy it, just to save
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
So the tasteful approaches are usually much better. All right, well, I kind of sped through that. One last point I have here, if you encounter a situation and not sure what to do, ask Google. At least get you on the right path, right? Any other questions for me? Or any experiences you guys have found that maybe I didn't talk about?
Have you done any user testing?
We have not. I'm the first person that's been testing our stuff. So that would probably be possibly a good idea. Yeah. Because that'd be one step further, I thought about even just closing my eyes and trying to navigate a site, to see what that's like. But we have not. Were you going to say something?
I was wondering, do you have PDFs on your site? How do you deal with those?
We do have a lot of sites that have PDFs, and to this point, we really haven't done much with that. I'm not even sure what we would do with PDFs. I mean, I know some PDFs do have text that could potentially be read, but I don't know if there's such a thing that exists that would do that. Because PDFs generally are visual. A lot of times the text in PDFs is converted to outlines, and you can't even tell what it is. So that would be an interesting challenge dealing with PDFs. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Art?
It's difficult. I know. It's when we've had third-party accessibility reviewers, that's always like half of the budget is dealing with PDFs. Because they're just difficult. And I mean, do you have any comments about making PDFs accessible?
What do we do with Jefferson Bank? We've got a bank client that is just, their site is full of PDFs that aren't, on the web, they're just downloads. But I thought we went through and did some general testing.
We had to go back and actually redo some of those PDFs to be
Right, but I don't remember what tool we used. Does that ring a bell to you? When we went through we had all these forms that were really done that were meant to be printed, and it was just like, we'll get them on the website so people can get to them, and then, accessibility came around. This has been 3 or 4 years ago that we...
It was actually Adobe Acrobat has some tools in there.
Yeah, right, and accessibility wasn't a third.
I guess if we filled them with the fillable form fields, maybe they have some sort of labeling on those fillable form
Might
fields?
have been labeling them and then sorting the tab order on them so that they were, if you did tab through them and they went in order, you could do that in Acrobat to assign which one is tabbed to first and make sure they all have a unique name, unless you want filling in a field in one place to duplicate it somewhere else, have the same name.
Yeah.
But nothing real extensive. I'm sure that's a problem.
It is.
Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to make a module and fix that problem. All right, well, that's pretty much all I got. Here's some sources that I used for this presentation, and thank you guys for attending.